Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we're going to be discussing a project that I was personally not aware of, and it is a Self-Sufficiency Project that was conducted as an experiment in Canada in the 1990s. And this project actually relates a little bit to things that we should be aware of when we're considering things like providing a basic income for everyone, or as we are proposing with the living income, which is providing a living income to people that do not work and providing work incentives such as better wages for the people that do decide to go into the workforce. So to discuss this, we have Jose Luis Urueta, who is currently in Sweden, but was living in Canada, who worked in this project. So welcome to the Hangout, and thanks for being here.
Hello. Well, like I explained earlier to you, I didn't work directly with the project. I work with Human Resources and Skill Development Canada, which is the department of the government who supported economically this project that was developed by and conducted by the Social and Research and Demonstration Corporation in Canada, called ESDC.
Okay, so in that we will be discussing essentially what you became aware of through this research and the result studies and so forth. To remind our viewers, we will be also taking questions and comments that you would like to place for Jose Luis throughout the Hangout. And also, if you didn't get to...
This is going to be like an exchange of ideas, because I'm actually interested in the way that you guys are approaching, because we didn't know each other before we talk about Utopia. We were talking about something totally different, and we end up talking about this. So I'm interested in to know what is it that you guys specifically propose, and show you what was proposed through the Self-Sufficiency Project, how was it made, who participated, and a little bit of what came out of it, but especially what I think of the results of the project and why it perhaps didn't work to the standards of the government to be implemented nationwide.
Yes, so why don't you start with sharing that, like the introduction of what is it, when did it happen, how was it implemented, who was involved?
Okay, so this project was, like I said before, it was funded by the Canadian government, and it was developed by a think tank. It was developed to run through a span of 10 years, and it involved more than 9,000 participants, okay? So it was a random selection experiment. So Statistics Canada will get the information of who was eligible for it. To be eligible for the study, you need to be an income assistance recipient, so a welfare recipient. You had to be a single parent at least 19 years old who had received welfare in the current month, and at least in the prior 12 months, you had to have received the welfare. So if you had these characteristics, Statistics Canada will pick up this person and put it into the pool of people, okay? So out of those 9,000 that were selected in two provinces, British Columbia and New Brunswick, out of this big pool, half of it was selected as a control group. So they had the same characteristics of the first group. That way we were comparing apples with apples somewhat, because we're still people and we cannot do a social experiment so controlled as you do in a scientific environment. So they hold for the most that they could hold to keep differences, to try to compare apples with apples, like I was saying. And half of it was the control group that didn't receive anything, and half of it would receive an offer to participate in this project. Once they received an offer, a notification, then a clock started to tick. That clock will take 1 year. During that 1 year, they had all this time to look for a job. If within that time they didn't get a job, they were no longer eligible to receive the income, okay? The income assistance. So what it was, it was to give people high standard enough of wage income to take the incentive of remain into the welfare system, something higher and more appealing than staying into the welfare system. So, for example, in 1994, a person working 35 hours per week, 50 weeks in an earning year kind of thing, give or take, at a wage of $6 per hour, will have received an annual income of about $1,050, the income supplement, which together with his earnings, which will be about 10,500, will add up to a gross income of $20,000. So the self-sufficiency supplement decrease with individuals' earnings. So the more you earn, the less money you will receive. However, it did not penalize otherwise. So if you had kids and you were receiving child support or child benefits from the government or some other tax benefit, you were not penalized otherwise. Only if your income was higher, you would be receiving less. Of the 9,000, two groups were created, were done. However, only 27% of that group that was selected was offered the supplement, only that part was they actually were the only ones who claimed to participate. Okay, how are we going so far? Any questions so far?
Yeah, it's going clear so far.
Okay. So there were two programs created. In British Columbia, it was only Self-Sufficient Project. And then in New Brunswick, they have kind of three groups, which what they call, it was a Self-Sufficiency Plus program. So in this one, they had the plus that was added. So they had three groups. They had the control group, which didn't get offered anything. They had a second group that was offered only the supplement. And they had the plus group that was offered not only the supplement, but also job coaching, resume, elaborate tailoring, anything related to join the labor market in information-wise and education-wise was given to them, So that's pretty much how it was done. However, since as a policymaker, you have to think what problems you're gonna run into. So they didn't.
Okay, it seems that it cut out. So I'll try to see if he is coming back. So hold on there. Okay, you're back.
Yeah. Okay, so this project didn't only run with the problem of poverty, but it also had to fight with dependence on the system. So most programs that are transferring income to poor people in order to reduce poverty, typically they reduce the incentive for the people receiving this money to join the labor market. There is little incentive for them, especially the offer they get on the labor market are considerably almost the same money that they're making off the welfare system. So many of those receiving income assistance have low levels of education, and their starting wages are going to be very, very low in comparison to what income assistance is. So recipients can continue to keep on going with the reliance on the welfare system, or they can accept a lower income in the labor market. So if there's not a real incentive, it's very hard to get yourself out of that position. You really need to have that incentive. However, you don't want people to depend on that supplement that you're going to give. You don't want dependence on that system, because that system will cost money. Anything you do, anything you propose, you need to have a well-sound plan on budget. If you don't have a well-sound plan on budget and how this is going to run with budgets for the government, nothing is going to happen. And I think this is where all the misfall of this project is it went away.
So in terms of the intent, the underlying intent of this is precisely to make people go back into the workforce, so to speak, and not be depending on welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So in this, we are here discussing a lot about basic income, living income. The idea of basic income is that it is given to everyone unconditionally. That is the Basic Income Guaranteed Project. The idea that we have is that we call it the living income proposal, which is you provide this kind of living income, which is to cover your living needs, not too little, but not too much either. But
Mm-hmm.
in order to still provide to people this incentive to keep going to work, is to provide at least double that living income, that their wage, their minimum income, their minimum wage is at least double the living income, which is something that
So it's pretty much the self-sufficiency project kind of thing.
exactly.
So you're getting a supplement. You're not getting income assistance. You're getting a supplement to your salary. So only if you work you will get this income assistance.
Exactly. That's what we propose. And the notion was, of course, that it wasn't the government giving that incentive or that supplement, but that it could be something eventually planned out with corporations themselves. Because, when you give more money to people, you will get a larger consumer base, and there is more efficiency in the economy as more money is within it. And that eventually benefits everyone. Um, so what's your perspective on
Yeah, but
this?
you need this is the thing. This is the thing, and this is where it all went to the garbage, for saying it somehow. There were findings that were good out of the self-sufficient project. Because for me as a person, the main part is that there is a social change. And even if that social change occurs within 20% of the 100% of these 9,000 people, I think it's worth it. If you change the life of 20% of 9,000, that's a lot of lives that you change it. Their kids were doing better in school. A lot of these families, they suffer with family violence, drug dependence. Their kids are not taken care of. They do really bad in school, and they just click on the cycle again. The kids are gonna be violent, and the kids are not gonna and they're gonna be dependent on the welfare system, and it's just a never-ending cycle. So I think for the social part, there was some findings that show that yes, life was changing for some people. But in reality, when you talk to an esthetician, you need to give them real significance in numbers out of the totality, you know? So there wasn't enough significance or relevance of change, especially in how much did it cost the government and how much revenue did they save from it. Because the idea is that, yes, you're giving a supplement to these people. However, they're not receiving. Once you start receiving the income supplement, you renounce to your welfare. So you were not receiving welfare anymore. You're receiving the income assistance and your salary. The income assistance, the supplement, and your salary. So you were starting to pay taxes of that money. You were paying higher taxes because instead of $10,000, you were making $20,000 a year, in 1994, which was a very decent amount of money. So you were paying higher taxes. That means there's more contributions of that money towards the government. So if you compare what they were getting before without working, without paying taxes, just on a straight up welfare income assistance, plus the money they're saving. But since it was offered to only half of this group, and that only a percentage, a 27% of them accepted to run into the program, then you didn't have a sizable amount of people to demonstrate that it was actually going to produce some results. And remember that anything that you propose it has to be governmental. Corporations are not going to give you any money. They're not. It's just, that's what it is. And when you're dealing with governments, you're dealing with time spans of the time that that government is on power. So if you cannot prove to this government in a period of 4 years, even though the project was set up to run for 10 years, if you cannot demonstrate to that government and they cannot use it in the political platform and say, look, I did this, we saved this amount of money, we got all these people out of welfare, we did, unless you can prove significantly on stats numbers that you actually did something and that you save up money in that 4 year span, then you yeah, I don't want to say the word, you screwed.
So is this why it was completely, it was just, it ran for those 10 years and it didn't continue at all?
My opinion. That's my opinion, because what I see is that yes, there were, it increased employment and earnings and income. It had an effect on welfare receipt, depending the structure of the family, of course. You know, it encouraged people to reduce the amount of time they to increase the amount of time they spend with their family, to have a better quality of life, to enjoy more spare time with their kids and stuff. So I think there was a big social value of this project, and there were things that were sizable, but not sizable enough to be shown on a budget, because it didn't save that much. That's what I think it was. At the end, it all comes to budgets. That's what it is. That's why when something is proposed that it is, I don't know, I'm very, very pro-social. However, I understand that systems work like they work, and we are forced. I think we have the need to learn how the system works and work within that system to change it little by little. We cannot just I'm not participant of just be an activist and just scream or throw rocks or move people to a park, and that doesn't do anything. However, if I learn how the system works and I work for the system, and if I help the life of 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, and each one of us does the same thing, that's better than the other kind of activism. So radical changes are never good. Progressive changes are good. And for that, we really need to know how things work from within, so we really can change the system eventually.
And that's why I find this project so meaningful. And it's really a shame that not many people are even aware of it. I mean, I asked a few Canadian people, they weren't aware of it. We've had Canadians here in these Hangouts many times, and all we knew of is that Manitoba experiment, which I thought you were talking about initially. But these kind of projects and the results, we really need those results to be more known widely, because people often tend to minimize these kind of experiments, even if they lasted for 10 years, because there is not enough results, as you were mentioning. And it's really a shame that just by statistics, this kind of effects that could be implemented in a society for actual social change are simply prevented because there are not enough numbers that benefit the government. I mean, that is really unacceptable, and it's really a shame. So what can we do about this?
I know, what can we do about it? I think I don't know. I think what they did was good to know how it will work, and especially having a control group help to compare what one group fair and the other what didn't. However, I think if an experiment like this will be done again, I think everybody should be offered the income, and everybody should be offered the plus, job coaching, helping them to join the labor market, because like I say, if you want a society to go forth, the first people that you have to help is the people that have low access to education, and you have to give them some skills somehow, doesn't matter what kind of skills they are, you need to give them some skills so they can join the labor market. So you cannot just offer an income supplement without the skills, because one of the biggest failures for policymakers was that in the long run, they just didn't, because the supplement was offered for 3 years to avoid dependence, in the long run, it didn't work, because after 3 years, when the supplement stopped, a lot of them, what the policymakers were expecting at that time is that, okay, since they're going to be receiving this income, their life standards are going to change. They're going to live better. They're going to get used to eating better, get used to having more leisure, having a regular life like any other person does. However, over time, they noticed that it didn't improve in a totality, because what they wanted was like, okay, eventually because they're working full time for this business, they're gonna get a better wage or earn more skills. But since this is people that from the get-go were negatively selected because they didn't have any skill, or the if they had a skill, they were in disadvantage with the rest of the people in the labor market that they were going to compete against. So I think if an experiment like this will come out again, I don't believe that we need to have that control groups in a social experiment. It's kind of unfair. Maybe on a medical treatment, because then you can measure. There's things that you can measure, but on a social level, I don't think there should be any control groups. I think it should be offered to everybody, and it should be offered with the whole thing. Okay, we'll help you you're going to have the skill of making a resume. You're going to have the skill of, assisting to certain courses if you want to take these courses, so you can join whatever sector of the labor market it attracts more to you, So I think that'll be a better outcome, perhaps, for the Self-Sufficient Project. Some people might argue that they like the randomized selection, because then you have a way to compare. But like I say, it's not a medicine that you're testing. It's not something heartless that you can. Okay, it just sounds like mathematical, and we're not mathematical. We're people. So I think a social experiment should be offered to everybody who is under those conditions, and then you'll see how many people actually got the supplement, how many lives you changed, and then it might be measurable, because I think that's why this experiment wasn't measurable enough, because you have that breakout of two groups, you got 50 and 50, and then you break it out at 27 of the people who receive, and then with the different ways and the people behave and the different levels of skills that they had, then you had to.
Okay, so he dropped out again, but I'd like to also share with everyone that is watching, if you have any comments, questions for Jose Luis, please place them now. So we'll wait until he joins back. To Magmi, Bilal, who is watching.
Sorry, it's my computer.
Yeah, sure. Just I wanted to say how I don't know if you're aware of, but there are going to be some basic income pilot projects that are being planned in the Netherlands and in Finland. And precisely this whole discussion is now going into creating these groups for measuring ones that do not get it at all, some others yes. So this randomized thing that you were mentioning as well, I also consider that the time frame is also very limited, because even your state of well-being will be limited. Like, that after those 10 years you will be done with it, and you will have to go back to maybe welfare or things like that.
They were offered this through 3 years only. The whole experiment went for 10 years, but the time that you have to receive the income assistance was 3 years. During those 3 years, you were eligible to claim your income assistance so long as every month that you have a full-time job. During those 3 years, you were allowed to claim the income assistance for the supplement.
Yeah, so in terms of this time frame, I mean, 3 years, you can really get that much results, and this just proves that if we want to really create any form of program that genuinely gets to affect people's lives, from my perspective, it should be longer, as you're saying, and it's something that you give us an insider perspective. There shouldn't be any control groups, and to make of those results maybe not only how can they be profitable for the government, but how do they actually benefit society, which obviously involves changing how the system is currently geared, isn't it?
That's the thing. Like, you make changes that on the long run are good for society. If you get those kids, a better life in their house, no violence. They have access to, I don't know, whatever toys the kids are buying. They don't feel excluded. They feel the same at the school. Their parents are working. They're busy all the time. They're happy. They treat them better. There's more leisure for the kids. There's more stuff that they can have. So you're breaking out that circle, and eventually those kids will do better. They actually did better in school. They were doing better in school. So these kids are gonna break out that circle of drug abuse or welfare dependence so in the long run it's really gonna cost less to the government. However, unless you can prove those numbers, then there's almost no chance for you to do it.
And this is
That's
part of the things where we kind of break our own legs, so to speak, as a society, when we depend only on these very strict and rigid numbers that, as you say, we are not only maths here. We're talking about human beings and people's lives, that maybe such change cannot be measured. And this is why I'm really like a person that does not like so much talking about statistics and things like that, because I think that it really numbs people to this kind of results without really looking at, well, how did that person's life change? How were their kids benefited by it?
they're important. They're important. However, what we need to add to the stats outcome is that we just increase it. We just put in more variables into the equation. That's all we need to do. The stats are really good, and they're needed, especially to measure any problems that we have in society and to solve it. However, we just needed to include a social component to the variables, you know and a social component that is not look into the next day, but it's look on the long run. You know, that's what we need to add in those statistics. More variables that include the social change that this is doing in the life of many people. And
Do
like
you
I
have?
say, uh-huh.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you said like I say, even if you change the life of 300 people, 300 families, because they were they were parents, they were single parents. If you change the life of, I don't know, 300, 500, 700 families, I think for me that's enough. But again, we have to fight with budgets, and that's where the people that want to change, that's where we have to get better. We need to get better at proposing things that are doable economically. We cannot just propose things that are unsustainable in the long run as well, because then we're doomed to fail. If we want to propose social change, we really, really need to get our feet on the ground and look at the numbers and see how can we work with the budgets that the government has. Because we're really easy and prone to criticize the government, but we never look into the numbers. We just look into the policies and we look into, why are they doing this? But we really need to feel the strain that they feel once they're inside, and how do they divide all this amount of money, and who gets what and why. So we need to get better at that.
What I really liked about this project is, in terms of the plus supplement, is how they assist them to get back into the workforce, which is something that we don't regularly have as part of the support given. We think that only providing them maybe money does it, but how many people are really, as you were saying, disempowered to get back to it and didn't have sufficient skills. And this is where the poverty trap or vicious cycle continues. So in terms of this poverty reduction, especially with the plus supplement, it seems that it went easier. But what about the ones that didn't get the plus supplement?
Um, it was that, I think that's where they saw more of the decay over time. That they just re- as soon as the income stopped, they just leave the labor market again and turn into the welfare again. You know, I think that's where you saw most of the fail. But again, the plus was only offered for New Brunswick, and the other experiment happened in the rest of the experiment happened in British Columbia.
In terms of basic income in Canada, this is becoming like a very well-known subject now. We've had people also discussing it here. Do you have any comments on it? I know that you're not currently living in Canada, but it would be good if you can share your perspective, maybe now as an outsider, in terms of these programs implemented by the government. Would it be possible to give a basic income to everyone from your perspective?
To give a basic income, like an assistance to everybody who is working, so
To
everybody,
everyone,
so everybody has
indistinctively.
like the same amount of money.
Yeah,
I think
basic income is to
there's
everyone.
one thing that you have to take into account, and that in societies like Canada, where people invest money, lots of money, and time becomes money as well, into education, they want a return to that investment, you know? And it is utterly unfair that a person who spent 10 years and $130,000 in debt to go to university is gonna get the same salary than a person, I don't know, who is, I don't know, a secretary or a lower skill, for saying it, will receive a similar salary to that person. Then you have no incentive to have professionals in the land. So then that's what I say. Like when social projects like this, they should be offered to the lower bracket, so they have a decent income and a decent standard of living, so their kids are not affected, especially their kids, to break out circles of poverty. you know look at it in the long run for the kids. And yeah, but they should be like, as a person who invested in education, I think that there is an income disparity that should exist if you invested that money and that time. Otherwise you will have no doctors, you have no masters, you have no PhDs, you have all these skills will be gone. There'll be no incentive to invest so much in education if you're just going to receive the same amount of money. So
What
I
if
think
education was actually given by the government and it
you have this
wasn't maybe a,
you have this
thousand?
but you have that in Sweden. We have that here. You have free education up to master's degree, and if you want to be a PhD, you get paid to be a PhD. you know However, there is a return on investment. you know and people who work in lower skills here, they have a decent salary. Everybody can live good. That I accept. And it's not by a supplement. It's just because the minimum wage, the minimum standards are high. So a person who's earning low here is earning well to live, is earning to live well. you know more than a little, like, over the line of the basics.
So they
Especially,
are living with a living income, so to speak, as we call it.
yes, they are. It happens here. I could say that it happens here, unless you want to have like spend a lot of money on me, then you know
Of
but
course.
I would say that, yeah, the minimum, what the people who make the lowest, who is at the lowest bracket here, they have a good standard of life. They have a decent living income because the normative in the law allows it for. However, you pay a lot in taxes, but
Yes,
then
like
that's
40%, isn't it, or something like that?
yeah. Well, it changes on the margin. It's up to 40 or 50%. Like it starts in different brackets. It's the same in Canada. However, you pay 25% of sales taxes. You pay that on everything. So every time you buy food, every time you spend your money, 25% of that is another 25% to your salary. So if you can, that amount of money is a lot. It's like about up to, depending on what bracket you are, it can be up to 50 or 75% of
But
your income.
also, as my Swedish friends say, well, yeah, we pay a lot of taxes, but look at how we live. And
Yeah,
I've been there, and it's,
that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
that is a viable solution,
Yeah.
just to raise the taxes. But then you have to have governments that are very effective with the money. And
Transparent, with integrity, and
more
really giving
transparent,
results.
because corruption exists anywhere. You know,
Exactly.
you cannot say that there is no corruption here. Or the corruption exists anywhere, but not overly done in your face corruption. You
Like in
know,
Mexico or Latin America, you know?
like Colombia for that matter. You know,
Exactly.
so, yeah.
So we have one question. Let's get to it. This is from Larry Manuela, and he's saying, "I want to know what the questions are related to the statistics. What are the precise points they will be measured? Like, what is their spending on now that they have received the money? Did their mindset changed?" He's talking about like the results or how you would measure people's results upon receiving the supplement.
hmm Um, like I say, none of like the mindset or any of this that wasn't measuring the statistics. What they wanted to do was joining the outcomes on the labor market. You know, if eventually the ideal that they wanted to measure was like, okay, all these people joined the labor market with the supplement, and in 3 years, when the supplement was going to end, they were receiving not 10,500 of assistant, but it was like in 2,000 because their salary had grown over time so much because they acquire skills, because they acquire time working and yeah, skills over practice, you know, of the time they were in the labor market. However, a lot of them didn't, you know, and when the supplement ended, they just either keep working at a lower end, or they just quit and went back into the welfare system. So that was specifically what what wanted to be measured in the in the outcome of the experiment, among other things, you know.
Yeah, so as a conclusion for Larry as well, what we discussed throughout the Hangout is precisely how this social component is necessary in addition to these statistics that the government was looking for, so that people get to also take them as part of their results to further this type of, I wouldn't call it even experiments, but actually projects that can be in a longer term to precisely continue seeing the actual changes that people have throughout their life. 3 years from my perspective is little to nothing to get any form of substantial results, even though you're sharing them as well. But if you want to create this type of projects and changes little by little, I would say that we really need not only more governments to be interested in this, but also to place a lot of attention to this kind of social change, as Larry was saying. You know, how did their mindset change, their relationships with the family? All of that really is, it adds up to a form of social investment. It becomes a better society altogether.
Yep.
So, well, we are going to finalize this hangout, and I would like you to, oh, he dropped out again. But we are about to finalize this hangout. So if anyone has any last questions, comments, please share them today. To remind you, we will be continuing to discuss this kind of subjects where we will also be measuring other things like drugs addiction and things like that, which we have been only superficially discussing today in terms of how people's lives change from that perspective, because there's usually like this stigma that people on welfare are not only lazy but get into drugs. So
Yeah. And you have to take into account that drug addiction is not just a will to do drugs. Drug addiction at a certain point becomes a disease, you know, and that's a thing that you have to take into account, and you have to accept it as it is. You know, it becomes a disease.
yes, it is part of the things that eventually also the government has to take into consideration in terms of health systems and so forth. So I definitely agree that we don't have to judge the governments as much, but rather see, okay, how can I take care of my life along with this support? And this is something that we talk about all the time. It's not just, okay, give me money now, but okay, how am I going to take care of myself? How I'm going to better my health, my relationships with family, and so forth, if we really want to create that change. It doesn't only come with money, but actually with will to be part of that change. So any last words?
Oh, thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing on this,
That was
because
really fun.
We really need these kind of discussions to really look, into the nitty-gritty situation and accept that we as human beings still require these kind of incentives to get back into work and to not get complacent with any form of welfare or basic income. That if we really want to change, we really have to then put our effort as well, which I completely agree with.
It costs. It change because effort. It costs time. It costs many things, it would never happen from one day or from one year to the other. It's generationally, and we have to take it and accept that it's going to be generationally. And that next generations are going to profit from all these little works, these grains of sands that we're putting around.
Absolutely agree. And yes, it's not going to be an overnight thing. It is a change in our mindset, in the way that we live, that we relate to money. So this is a work in progress. And thanks a lot for sharing with us.
No, thank you.
And thanks to you, the viewer, for watching. If you didn't get to watch the live transmission, but you still have questions for Jose Luis, please place them in the comment section of this YouTube video. And see you next time. Bye, Jose Luis.
Ciao.